Hi, let's talk about if statements. An if statement is really the basic decision-making process of a program. They exist in almost every program out there, whether it's video games or accounting software or Facebook. They're in there. So the way they work, you have the word if, and then you have some condition, which is a true or false statement, and then a chunk of code that's executed if that statement is true. If the statement is false, then it skips it. So for example, you might say, if the weather is nice, let's go skateboarding. It is kind of a simple, normal English thing that we might say that is an if statement. It's, if, and the condition is the weather's nice, and the chunk of code we run is go skateboarding. And if the weather's not nice, then we skip it. We might create what's called an else statement to catch happens if that statement's not true. So you'd say, if the weather's nice, let's go skateboarding, else, let's stay home. So staying home would be what happens if the weather's not nice. The statement is false, it skips the skateboarding and goes to let's stay home because that's what's in the else statement. Another example is when I work with my robotics team, we use if statements a lot for controlling the robot. So you might say if button 1 is pressed, drive forward, and else stop. We also have something called an Elseif statement, which gives it an else with another if and then its own condition, which executes if the first if isn't true. And the else ifs always have to go after an if, but before an else. The else's are optional and the else ifs are optional, but you always have to have an if first, and then if you want else ifs, you put them in there. Then if you need an else, you put it at the end. So for drive the robot, you might say if button 1 is pressed, drive forward, else if button 2 is pressed, drive backwards, else stop. And when it sees that either the if or the else if statement is true, then it won't look at any of the statements after that, because you can actually have a long chain of else if statements in there, and you don't need to check them all if you know one of them is true. Only the way they're set up is only one of them can be true, or I should say, you can have multiple that are true, but only the first one that's true will get executed. Once one is true, it skips everything after that. So again, with driving the robot, you could say, if button 1 is pressed, drive forward. Else, if button 2 is pressed, drive backwards. Else, if button 3 is pressed, turn left. Else, if button 4 is pressed, turn right. Else stop. That's actually a very legitimate chain of code that we could have when we're programming our robots. It's just that chain of if, else, if, else, if, else, if, else, just to have all that in there. And you can go on and on and on with these else ifs as far as you need. Some primitive versions of artificial intelligence are really just huge chains of else if statements, starting with an if, of course, and ending with an else. Another example is in many modern video games, especially shooters, things like Call of Duty. When you get hurt, the screen turns red around you. So what you might say is, if the player's health is greater than 30%, make the screen look clear and normal. Else, if this player's health is between 0 and 30%, then make the edges red. And else, the player's dead. Because if you're not above 30%, you're not between 0 and 30%, then you're at 0 and you're dead. And you don't need that if on that final else to specify that it's at 0, because we know that already. Logic kind of dictates that. So again, I just kind of want to reiterate with these that they just go in that very logical order. It's just the first thing happens, then the next thing is checked, then the next thing is checked. And once one of them is true, it exits out. It doesn't check any of the others. It's just very sequential like that. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave comments below. I'll check them, I'll respond. Please tell your friends about this channel. We really want to build up an audience. Thank you.